All right, we're live. I am here
Ah,
with Amir. Hold on a second. Majidimehr. Mm,
perfect, perfect. Just a little scared. You just have to have courage when
I
you
am.
say it.
Well, I'll tell you. Really, I looked it up.
Yeah,
Right. I'm like, how do you
yeah,
pronounce this? And the only
yeah.
thing was this robot that announces it, like Majidimehr, something like that. So I'm like, I don't know. I'll go. I'll roll with it. I'll try it and see what happens.
Yeah, Robot was right. You did well.
All right. So, if you guys don't know, Amir runs Audio Science Review, ASR for short. So, if you see that everywhere, ASR, Audio Science Review, the website, he does a bunch of testing. And yeah, you know, what do you do? What do you say you do?
Well, I run a site where the anchor, if you will, are these reviews that I do once a day or so of every kind of audio products. But also there's a forum where people either discuss the reviews or they have the topics of their own. And so it's a full-time job, manning the forum between dealing with spammers and also, of course, answering people's questions and so forth. So it pays to be retired and not have a, daily job to be able to keep up with what all is going on. It's I'm more busy than if I had a full-time job, if you will. And
I
it's a
hear.
great forum. Yeah, it's a lot of good members, very knowledgeable members. A lot of times people talk about me. I'm like, no, it's me and all these other people together that, have this great body of knowledge.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff on there. I mentioned, I think, I consider you like the professor. When you have your YouTube channel, you're there teaching. I'm like taking notes. I'm like, man, I'm learning. I'm over here learning over here. That's awesome.
Yeah,
So I
that's
have a
that's
lot
the
of
reason for
questions.
it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions for you because I put it out there. I
Ask.
said, hey, I'm gonna have Amir on, and I posted on Reddit, and I posted on audiophile and budget audiophile, and on yours. So I have
Yeah,
questions coming in from everywhere. So I'm gonna try to
sure.
ask some of those. So if I'm not flowing 100%, it's just
Yeah,
because I'm just trying to knock a lot of these out for you
no
guys
problem.
out there. So all right, so here we go. And we have people in the chat too, and I'll try to get to those too.
Sure.
So lots of questions, and so we'll try to boil it down. One of, I guess one of your competitors, Steve Jobs, one of my favorite things that he said was like, one of the hardest things is to make something simple, right?
Yeah.
It's like to
Yep.
simplify complex things, I think is very hard. And
Yeah.
so maybe we'll try to do that today.
Sure.
Yeah. So, speaking of simplifying, I spoke with somebody who said they knew you from way back when you did a demo of WMA versus MP3, and they're like, "Man, this was a genius demo," and you kind of
Well,
showed the differences. Do you remember that?
I remember that. That's what really put my career on fast track at Microsoft. I was managing this team of about 20 PhD and engineers that, frankly, nobody wanted to manage them at Microsoft. They couldn't speak their language. And I was handed this team, and I asked them what they're working on. They said, better music compression than MP3. And I said, great, show me what you have. And frankly, what they had didn't sound very good. I was like panicking. I'm like, gosh, the first team I get to manage, and what they have is no good. But they were fantastic, researchers and engineers, very cooperative. We worked for a year or two, and we managed to get very good quality compared to MP3. And we had set up demo for Bill Gates, and everybody was nervous about that. And the meeting with Bill started very, very poorly, where I don't even remember if it was in bad mood or what it was, but he had all of his direct reports. So all the senior execs are there, and we're sitting on the other side. He was in super bad mood, but I had set up this demo of MP3 versus WMA, and got to me, and he'd never seen me. I'd only been there for a year and a half. And I did the first demo, and the tone of the whole meeting changed. And from then on, it just went exceptionally well. And he finished the meeting with, what do you guys need to blow this out? What do you need to be successful? And of course, my boss, Jive, we need a lot more headcount, a lot more people. And, the group I was part of was 50, 60 people. By the time I finished, it was 1,000 people reporting to me alone. So so that person has good memory. That goes back to 1999 or so. So what are we talking?
Wow.
30 years ago, was it? So,
Wow.
yeah, a long time ago.
That's how. Did he jump over the chair? I don't know if you've seen that video.
No. No, Bill, super smart guy, but I had an advantage in that I knew audio and video, and he was not exposed to audio and video, but he had a lot of passion around audio and video. He would keep saying that one day audio video is going to be done with software, and everybody would look at each other like, what software? Is cameras and video signals and audio signals? What software? How does software going to do anything? I imagine today we're sitting here, there's software sending things back and forth. So he had the right vision.
Speaking of Bill Gates, I saw somewhere that he reads like a lot. He reads a ton of books. He tries to sit down and read all kinds of stuff. And I like to read as well, but I can't read that fast. As far as taking in the knowledge, I kind of go a little bit slowly. Right now, I'm just reading Tool's book, and I'm on chapter 8, and I can't wait because I think that's about the bass, right? I'm ready for the bass part.
It's a tough book to read from A to Z. The third revision is a little bit better than the original, but it's really a reference book. You're going to go back to it 30, 40, 50 times and discover new things. It's not written as a novel A to Z where you go through it quickly. It just has so much information in it. You can't grasp it the first time. You got to go back and multiple times to dig in.
Yeah, I hear that. I like to read business books, so it's kind of that type of book. It's kind of that. But I've never read. It looks like a textbook. It's like really a textbook. I've never read a textbook from front to back, but here I am. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing. A lot of people read that book, but I think I heard somewhere, I don't know if it was you who said it, that you read like a bunch of the sources too. Yeah. There's like 200 something sources. What?
It's 270 to actually know the count. So I probably have about 100, 150 of them. Let me tell you why I read it, because I didn't believe what he was saying. I remember reading this stuff and I said, it makes no sense what he's saying. Like he says a reflection from a speaker hitting the sidewall sounds different than hitting the ceiling. As an audiophile, I was like, what's he talking about? It's the same sound, basically, hitting the ceiling or the right wall. Why would it sound different? And he explained it, and I said, that's not true. So I went back and looked up the references, and they're hard to find. Some of them are Audio Engineering Society where I had the membership, but I had to get membership at other ones like Acoustic Society of America, ASA, to get those papers. Some of the other ones are just darn near impossible to find. But I searched and searched, read each one of them, and I noticed what he was doing wasn't just a dump of what he knows. He was stitching a story together with research from many branches. He himself brings 20, 30% of it with his team, but the other 70, 80% is coming from so many other researchers around the world. Some of them come from different angles, like on speech comprehension. He goes to where education is very important. So Canadian government had done a lot of research, UK and others. It's a health and education well-being, where the research, if a teacher is in a classroom, how can he make sure that the student sitting all the way in the back understands what you're saying? And they realize that certain reflections in a room reinforce the direct sound, and therefore that person can understand way back in the classroom. Same thing applies to a center channel in the home theater. You have the dialogue there. You go put gauze all around your room and mask all reflections because that's what your intuition says. You eat up all the reflections and the sound power goes down, and it's harder to understand all of a sudden what somebody's saying. So you see how you can connect research that was very standalone and very sparse, and then he paints it all together as one comprehensive idea.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me, because I'm into binaural, right? And so I was trying to look and like, what do you call this? And I was asking around, like, what is this thing called? And somebody mentioned, like, look up vector-based, I don't know, something array. I forgot. But, I found this guy, Professor Pulke. I don't know if you've seen.
Vanderkooi.
Oh, no. It's Ville, and then the last name is Pulkki. And he did.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah, he did something vector-based amplitude panning, right? VBAP. And sure. I guess it was picked up by like DTSX. He made it open source. Like he could have made a bunch of money with it. But instead he just put it out there, and then like he's like, yeah, my stuff is in, if it says DTSX, then it's in there.
Right.
But it was just funny because I was reading Tool's book, and there he is, like he mentions him. I'm like, man, that's weird. Like I was just researching this guy, and then he's talking about him. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people, again, think it's his book. It's his point of view, but it's just every paragraph has 2 references in it. I mean, he doesn't skip a beat where it provides backup for what he says. Everybody can have an opinion about acoustics, but can you prove it? And he proves it with research after research. So really, really great. If you meet him ever, it's just fantastic. He used to teach a class at Cydia, which is an installer show. It was a 3-day course, all day, 3 days, 8 hours times 3. And I tell you, it was $350 or something for that course. I used to tell people that's the best $350 you can ever spend, was go sit through those 3 days. He's retired, doesn't do that anymore. But so the book is a replacement. But in person, the slides and his presentation are much more understandable than reading the 300-400 page book.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm kind of curious. What is your opinion on binaural? Because at first I thought I was crazy, like I'm trying to do binaural stuff, and then as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, he's not totally against it. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool.
You're just asking me something that I've never gotten into. I've listened to binaural, but it's just a field that I've not been into at all. So I wish I could tell you I know this stuff, and I'm good at bluffing that I know more than I do. But in this case, I can't even bluff tell you I know anything about binaural. It just hasn't been a field that's been in my domain.
One thing I know, smart people are always willing to say when they don't know. I mean, that's you say I don't know. It's easy. I'll go find out.
And that's the thing. If I need to, I'll go and research the stuff. But in this category, binaural stuff, one day I need to get into it because it's so closely attached to the psychoacoustics, and it has some application to acoustics in the room, but I've just never studied.
Well, the thing that I found fascinating in the book was just he was talking about how they would do some testing with the people in the room, right? And I think it had to do something with how fast they got used to the room and how they could hear through the room. And then they did the same thing, but then with binaural recordings. And they're like, the ones that they picked, the speakers that they liked, are the same for the binaural one as. I'm like, man, that's amazing.
Yeah, that I do know, actually, they're working there. So one interesting story is that there was this, they have a $1 or $2 billion division in Germany that does car audio. Harman Becker, and they're always competing to get the OEM business for Toyota and Honda and Mercedes and what have you. You've seen Mark Levinson and Lexicon brands there, and one of the Japanese companies had outbid them with a lower cost system, and I told this Japanese car manufacturers that they knew what the Japanese liked as far as sound, and that sound that they liked was not the same as what Americans liked. Or that the sound that people want even in Germany, they had convinced this large OEM to switch to them, and they had a cheaper system to boot. So Sean Olive actually wanted to test this theory. So they had the facilities in Northwich in LA, US, to do this kind of testing. But how do you then test it elsewhere? So they made binaural recordings of the sound in a car with different, with their system versus others. And then they took that same binaural thing and just using headphones, people sat there in China, Japan, and elsewhere and listened with the same set of the car sound, but only through headphones. And the results were that, no, we all hear similarly. The same priorities. There's no difference in a Japanese person liking sound or a Chinese person or Western. So that work I know is great for reproduction of a sort of virtual experience in another environment without having to go take a whole BMW with audio system and ship it to Japan, and then one person at a time sit in that car. Versus if you look at the test that they did, it's a conference room, a whole bunch of people sitting there with headphones taking that test rather than being in their car. So it's quite cool that way.
What's kind of interesting is I've done tests similar to that, and what was interesting was it depends on whether I'm sitting in the room. Like if I'm sitting in the exact spot where it was recorded, it's way more realistic than if I go into a different room. Like, I guess it's my eyes are also giving me cues. Yeah. Anyway, I thought it was interesting. People keep mentioning like, oh, go ahead. I was
going to say, they first test that hypothesis first. So they test the person in the real room, and then they test them again with headphones and say with binaural recording to see what the correlation is. And usually they get 80-90% correlation. So it's not 100%, but you have to verify because you could do a binaural recording that's not representative, doesn't give you the same data. So Harman always does that check of making sure the simulation is similar enough to the real deal.
Right. People keep saying that you look a little bit different than your profile photo.
Yeah, the profile photo has got a story itself. I used to go to Japan all the time when I worked for Microsoft and for Sony. And meetings always finish on Friday. And the flight that I had on United coming back was always Saturday afternoon. And so I would have this, a Saturday or Sunday. I would always stay one day extra through Sunday because there was these Shinto weddings in Ueno Park in Tokyo. And I would have a routine where I would get up in the morning, get a taxi, go over there and take my camera and take candid pictures of both the Shinto weddings that were there, but also these girls that dress up with this counterculture thing on by the station. And the weddings were assembly line. Every 20 minutes, a different bride and groom would get married. And so I would just sit there and I'd have all these models every 20 minutes. There'd be a different couple. And I would take my long telephoto lenses and stuff, take pictures. So the bride that you see, the beautiful bride, is actually one of those wedding pictures that I took pictures of.
Wow. Amazing. So, I had to look it up. I wanted to make sure I didn't get a copyright strike. I thought you might have just got that from somewhere. I'm like, what is this?
No.
One thing I learned recently that I thought was interesting is you're talking about testing in mono, right?
Yep.
And I was reading, along in that section. I'm like, man, that's interesting that you can find out more. I need to start testing that to see what I can hear in mono versus in stereo when evaluating.
Yeah. So just for people to understand, Harman, and even before Harman, Dr. Toole started his career working at National Research Council in Canada. And there he wanted to understand what made people like speakers, what aspects, or if anything, was in common with preference. And along the way, one of the testing he did was, do people have similar preferences in mono versus stereo? And he found out that when he tested in stereo, people were a lot less picky about differences in speakers than they were if they're mono. And that was a beautiful thing because mono testing was so much easier. You could just put two speakers next to each other and just do A, B between them behind a curtain, you're done. With two sets of speakers, how do you position them? How do you angle them? What do you put on the walls? What do you play? What's the image? I mean, it gets so convoluted. Over the next 30 years, now that at Harman, they actually built a multi-channel speaker shuffler where they could shuffle all channels in a multi-channel system simultaneously and test that. But then they realized, heck, when we do mono testing, people are better at it in detecting at least spectral differences, which means the tonality, which is the most important thing the speaker does. Everything else it does is secondary, both in research and in practice. People think imaging is everything and all that, but what drives imaging is mostly the content. We talked about binaural content. Binaural content can make you think there's sound coming in places that you can't even imagine. So it's the content that's powerful there. So anyway, that's what they had done. So when I started getting into speaker testing, I actually was quite fearful. I was like, I'm going to test a lot. How the heck am I going to sit here and quickly judge all these speakers? Am I going to set up all these stereo setups? And, I'm going to do a test every other day. How the heck do I configure a position and all this stuff? And I remember that, they were doing tests in mono. So I said, well, why don't I start with mono? It's amazing. And just a few speakers I tested, I was like, wow, this is a lot simpler. I go to shows, they always have setups, right? You're trying to judge speakers in shows. Very difficult because it's all stereo and stereo content. But when I sit there in front of me, same position, same location, I put one speaker pointing at me, the job is so much simpler. So my advice is whether you're a reviewer or buying speakers, turn off the other channel. Just listen to one, listen to the tonality, see if you like it. When you have the second channel, if this is playing highs, that one's playing lows, they hide each other. So you can't hear whether the highs are accentuated or even distorted for that matter. But it's very non-intuitive. I tell you, I took the double-blind test at Harman a couple of times and it was mono. And I didn't know. They just took us in a room. There's a curtain and they said, sit there and here's a score sheet. And one thing plays, you're like, this is not right. Well, why is just one thing playing in front of you? But you quickly realize it's easy to compare the tonality then of the speakers that play. They're like, wow, they sound very different.
All right, so I'm going to ask something that's, I don't know where I'm going to go with this, but,
Sure.
In that case, less is kind of more in that we're able to focus, right? We're able to kind of, it's more a limitation of us. Right.
Yeah.
That we're able to hear better when there's only one thing playing versus like multiple sources of sound. And I'm into video, obviously. And in video, a lot of the movies are in 24p, right? 24 frames per second. But in VR, that would make you real dizzy. You'd want way higher frame rates. And it kind of got me thinking, why is it that if you watch like, The Hobbit was 48 frames per second, why is it that at certain times like it's almost like more information is detrimental? Like if I watch a movie like that, I feel like, oh, that doesn't it might
It
be
does,
more real,
yeah.
but it feels less real.
Because for decades we've grown into an experience of a movie being different visually because it was always shot at 24. It always had that kind of stutter or a little bit of smearing if they use low shutter speed. So when we're then given a higher fidelity one that's 50, 60, 120 hertz a second, it starts to look very liquid and reminds us of television, which is what the soap operas were done, everything in the old days. So in a way, we want that nostalgic look. We want lower fidelity. It's a very, very odd, non-intuitive thing. That's what we like, but that's the reality of it. That we want the experience of cinema to be different.
Yeah, I've heard that argument also, but I also think that it kind of gives you time in between the frames to kind of just imagine, right? So,
All right,
whereas the other one, it's almost like just too much. It's like telling you too much info, and you don't want to process all of that. And so I kind of wonder if there's an equivalent in audio where maybe that's why people like, old records, or maybe that's why they like tubes, because maybe this distortion's kind of like, don't pay too much attention. It's in my opinion, it's added stuff, but maybe it is pleasing. What do you say about stuff like that?
I think you're getting into, very different areas and complexities that they have. But let me make this point. After a while of doing testing in mono, I've actually learned to immensely enjoy well-recorded music on one speaker. I remember listening to mono testing and stuff, and then I went to stereo, and I was like, what the heck? It just happened. I mean, my entire body had adapted to listening to mono with a large soundstage around it. A lot of people think mono means one little speaker, but if you have wide dispersion, that hits the sidewalls and it diffuses the point source of a speaker. With exceptionally well-recorded music, with good speakers, I tell you, you can enjoy tremendous amount of music with just one channel. Now, I'm not going to tell you that if I had a choice, that's what I would do. But a lot of people think, everything about audiophile is about stereo and stereo separation, imaging. It really isn't. It's about the quality of the music, the quality of recording, and great sound. When you get that, it's remarkable how good, a single speaker can present it.
Amir, now all the speaker companies are going to hate you because you're telling them just, one speaker is good enough. We're at least trying to sell 2. Come on, man.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to sell 5.1 and it's 7.1. Everything. They've gone nuts, 9 channels. So they're crazy. They're trying to have us put holes everywhere in our walls and put more speakers on.
Yeah. So here's another thing, psychoacoustics, right? And I know you do a lot of stuff with DACs. And I kind of was thinking about how there's a conversion also going on with our ears and what's happening on a biological level. I'm like, are we like an organic DAC almost, right? Like we have to understand what the brain is doing, what how all this works. And I find that kind of interesting, like equal loudness contour curves and the 2K dip when it comes to the phantom center image. I'm like, these are things like you have to really understand, and if you don't, you're like, oh, okay, that's really cool. What do you think?
I'd say there's 2 ways to look at that. One is somebody that, like you, that wants to get in, enjoys learning, and this is what you do. I think you should learn and continue that journey to really understand as much of a psychoacoustic as you can. It's a broad field, it's a complex field. There are conflicting research that you have to know how to adjudicate. That's one class of person. I'm in that class. You sound like you want to be, in that class already, partially there. There's another class I say, all right, if this stuff's too hard for you to understand, trust the judgment and products from the companies that follow this. So, somebody says, look, I'm going to buy a speaker without listening to it. Is it okay if I buy this Revell speaker? I'm like, yeah, I'd say your odds are good because they do double-blind listening tests and they follow research. So odds of you liking it without any audition is high. You tell me you're going to buy this FUBAR speaker, nobody's measured, and there's a one gray-haired guy sits there and adjusts the crossover and whatever. It may be fine, but there's no way I can tell you the odds of that are high because, they're not following established things. So you can decide to just be passive about this and just trust the science, the engineering, and buy from product. Like, let's talk about Amplifier, Benchmark Audio, Benchmark Media. They built state-of-the-art, the best performing amplifier I've ever measured. Why? Because they designed it with great knowledge. They measure everything and they squeeze out a slice amount of distortion. So do I worry you're going to go buy some from Benchmark? No. But, here's Alibaba, AliExpress tube amp. It says it's got class A, whatever, or this DAC, it says using this chip. All that is just nonsense. You're taking a big gamble. And I'll tell you, most of the time you will lose with those kind of gambles, thinking that, I can read the spec sheet, therefore everything's good. It's like, no, there are many ways to market to you to make you think something's good. But in reality, you got to have proper verification of that stuff. If you don't have that, don't waste your money. I'm here to solve that problem for you, which is I'm going to go test all this stuff. Either I'm going to buy this stuff, spend my own money, or people send me this stuff. Follow the trail. We've tested enough stuff that, you now have a good choice of products. Still not done. I think we should measure another 5,000 or 10,000 products before we get there.
5 or 10,000. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's my goal. I mean, it's just there's a lot out there.
Is there any psychoacoustic phenomenons that you find interesting? Like that's maybe counterintuitive. Like that 2K dip I thought was interesting. Like anything that you found that's like, that's interesting.
Yeah, one of the most non-intuitive one is called the Haas effect, which says that if you have a reflection that's within certain time period, but it's lower amplitude, the brain essentially filters that out. And Haas actually set up experiments where people went on top of buildings and they sort of played these things and found out based on that distance and delay that certain sounds were not audible. It's remarkable. You think everything's a reflection. And intuitively, you think all reflections are bad, but turns out the brain is very good at saying, that information is a duplicate of the primary sound. It's doing nothing. I'm just going to ignore that. Imagine when we lived in caves, right? Your sound constantly reflected. If the brain was good at hearing every reflection as a reflection, as an echo, you'd go nuts, right? Our everyday life is inside the house, inside walls. So the brain, is very adaptive. Think over, I don't know, thousands, millions of years. I forgot how long we've been on this earth, but we've adapted to ignore certain things, filter things. So I think that's such a non-intuitive thing, that the reflection. Now you go into church, all of a sudden you hear all the reflections, right? There's a sound because those delays are much longer, and all of a sudden it's a different animal. So I'd say that's one of the most fascinating psychoacoustics with respect to sound reproduction in room. There are other ones with respect to how we do audio compression and we hear distortions, but that one I think is a fascinating one.
Got it. And I think it's those things, those like little things that are kind of deviations from what you'd expect. That I think that's why people are maybe a little bit turned off to maybe more objective stuff, because they're like, well, how about this? How about that? Well, that can be explained too. We just have to go a little further and we can explain that.
Yeah. It's our, we become audiophiles without training, right? One day you wake up, you decide, this sounds good, and you get more into it, and you're buying good recordings and a better stereo. So we have this feeling that we can learn everything we need to learn about audio with just the 2 ears and our brain. And a lot of intuitive things we can. If I turn up the bass, 15 dB, boom, 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 we all hate it. So we all good at that. But if I add, if I compress something into MP3, and I throw out 80% of the file size, now it's down to a little file, it's not intuitive why that little file still plays as if it's got the full frequency response, and its artifacts are very hard to find, yet most of the file is gone. How did that happen? And we got to accept that intuition works in certain domains in audio, does not work in others. Speaker tonality, intuition works really well. We all hear highs and lows, and you don't really need training unless you want to be able to describe what is wrong. But distortion in a speaker, no. That's a nonlinear thing. You may need training. You may have no ability to hear distortion in the speaker, or you may have it. But there's a domain where you should trust your intuition, but there are many other areas where trusting your ears is the wrong thing. Trusting your gut is the wrong thing. I call it lay intuition is our enemy. And, for me, I was an audiophile for 30 years till I met Dr. Floyd Toole. And in one meeting, I thought, I need to flush everything I thought I knew about speakers and sound reproduction. I really did. I completely erased everything. I thought, oh, man, I read all these things on the internet about acoustic products and speaker, everything. I had to forget it all, start over again. And people have such difficulty with this concept of, hey, you haven't been taught the real stuff. You read that book, 90% of it isn't stuff you've read casually online, right? I mean, it's like you read it, it's like, what did they just say? This first time I'm reading this. And that's what it's about. You've got to at some point trust the doctor that treats you, or the lawyer that knows the law better than you, or a CPA that knows accounting better than you. Why do you trust those professionals? But when it comes to audio, all of a sudden they're like, who's this guy? Who's this Dr. Tool, full Floyd Tool? I know I've got my ears. That's all I need. I plug in cable, sounding better. I don't need you to tell me that doesn't work.
One of my favorite comments from somebody when I started talking about tools, like, if they're so smart, if they know what everybody likes, then why don't they sell the most speakers out of anybody? I'm like, well, I think marketing and
Yeah.
that's a different thing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that was a funny comment that I heard.
It's a good comment. I work for this television broadcast company, video production and effects company, and there are different fields in that. We worked in the post-production, which is when you edit things. And we always had engineers that wanted to build what we call live consoles. Those are the big, panels where you can control many sources in a television station and everything. And our CEO always said no. And I asked him once, I'm like, why do you say no? It's similar technology to this. He says, Amir, everything about that product is about woodworking to build a big console and a bunch of switches on it. The electronics of it are this much. It's all about switches and woodworking. Same with speakers and things. It's about marketing. It's about woodworking. It's about the lowest cost. And Harman has never been good at that. Their marketing can be horrible. They're also fragmented. They've acquired different companies. JBL guys have their own way of looking at sound and different products and Harman. So I'd say, it's one of the worst marketed products from Harman. And also they don't scale fully, right? They don't build $100,000 speaker or $50,000 speaker. So if you want a grand speaker that goes, floor to ceiling, weighs 500 pounds, they're not in that market. But it's a late argument again, but it's not real. If the product is good, the product is good. Don't worry about how many is sold.
It kind of reminds me when people always say, like, oh, just trust your ears. Well, if that were the case, then why did Bose sell so many of the Acoustimax? And if you go to measure those, there's a bunch of stuff missing there, but they still sold a lot. I mean, a lot of people trusted their ears at that point, right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Here's a quick question that I thought was somewhat relevant here is from Fajon. I don't know how to say that. Would you ask him to comment on how many dB is significant in his measurements, i.e. he sees a spinorama and he can't tell if plus or minus dB are significant or not? And that's a good segue into my next question after this. But what do you think? So I see stuff for speaker measurements, and then there's DAC and amplifier measurements.
Yeah. Here's the issue with reading. I think he's asking me what would my ears say about those variations, right? When you're dealing with small variations let me actually reverse it. When you're dealing with large variations in frequency response, it's easy to determine if that area is exaggerated or not. I put an equalization in there and pull that area down. Let's say it's 5 dB peak between 1 and 3 kilohertz. And I pull it down 5 dB and I do an AB, and I can do that blind and say, oh, did it get better or did it get worse? But if it's 1 dB high and I do that, I may still be able to hear the difference, but it could be that I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm biased to think because I equalized it and it's more correct. Maybe that's why it sounds. So I personally don't advocate in my own reviews that I personally go and fix those 1 dB things. You are welcome when you get your speaker to go in there and correct that 1 dB and do your own listening test, or have somebody else do the AB on you and see if you can tell an improvement. So with frequency response errors, the best case detection is about half a dB when it's wide, and only been studied in low frequencies. This is actually research from Dr. Toole and Dr. Sean Olive. And so when it's wider, it hits a lot more notes. When it's narrow, chances of one note hitting that is low. And even if it did, will you hear that one note in the music amongst all the other ones? No.
I don't know, Amir. That recent thing that we had was that one little part of the song. So
yeah,
that was that one case, right? That was that one case. That one little.
Yeah, it's an exception. When you get resonances like that, they can sound different. But usually they aren't that narrow. I was testing a very high-end headphone that just came, $1,000 headphone, and it had a peak in high frequencies, and I put a inverse one, I tell you, it's just such a great proof that you can't hear the difference. And I would turn it on and off, was 5 dB, 6 dB correction, but it was narrow, and you can't hear it. Our hearing works on a bank of auditory filters that are tuned to different frequencies, and their bandwidth widens as frequencies go up, which means that you can't tell anything within that bandwidth at highest frequencies as much as a few hundred hertz. So when it's a few hundred hertz, you have a little trough in the middle of it, you're not going to hear that difference because the hearing system is averaging that block of spectrum, not just one sharp spike. Circle back all the way to 20 hertz, 20 to 50 hertz in bass frequencies, we're sensitive to 1 or 2 or 3 hertz. So the bandwidth there gets very narrow. That's why you need to have very quality parametric EQ for bass correction. The bass peaking, the mode may be at 72 hertz. And if you go put it at 68, it may not work as well. So in bass frequencies, you want to be very accurate. You go above 1 or 2 kilohertz, no, don't go chasing narrow and small differences.
All right. So the width, I think, also matters, is what you're saying. How
Yes.
the range. So if it's like a one small little bump versus a really wide bump, that makes a difference. And also, I think it's the peaks are more audible, right? Rather than dips. Is that true?
I've heard that. I think it's generalizing correctly. A narrow trough is not audible for the same reasons I just explained, because their bandwidth is too low. If they're if from 1 to 3 kilohertz, you have a dip, it's quite audible. If it's broad. But yes, anything that's narrow and it's usually caused by cancellations, which means you can't correct with EQ anyway. So
Got it.
you might as well give up anyway on those kinds of things.
All right. So hopefully that answers the question. Let's see. So I have a tough one for you here. Tough question.
Yep.
You ready?
Yep.
All right. So is it possible to have 100% objective review? With what would that look like if it was 100% objective, none of Amir's opinion whatsoever? What would that review look like?
It's the electronics reviews that I do. Those I don't do any listening tests, and I present the information, and I present a threshold of audibility that's exceptionally conservative. That says, look, we want to have noise and distortion below minus 115 dB. You get those two below minus 115 dB, that assumes that you basically have a 120 dB playback level, so exceptionally loud, like at a live concert. What would the nose floor needs to be, and a distortion floor where you don't hear any hiss or any distortion? That's about 115 dB, best case dynamic range. When I can prove to you with measurements that the noise and distortion have gone below that threshold, I'll swear on anything you want to swear, bet any amount of money that you cannot pass any blind, any control test of audibility there. So those are the ones that are proven. Now, as I said, it's highly conservative thing. Casually, a standard audio file at 50 to 60 dB, they're already lost when it comes to nonlinear things, although they can hear noise. A system that the noise floor is 80 dB down, you will hear it. Indeed, there are some amplifiers with IEMs people plug in, you can hear the hiss, because the noise floor is only 80 dB, and that's not enough. When the music stops, we go from track to track, you hear shh, that's not good. So good news is that this kind of quality comes very cheap these days. $100 DAC gives you what I just talked about, just $100, and doesn't break the bank. And by the way, there are tons of broken products that are not that good that cost way more than that. So it's one of those things where you don't have to decide. I give you the most pristine, cleanest plate to put your food on. And if you come and say, can I get a dirtier dish and put my food on, will I get sick? I'm like, probably not. You probably won't go to the hospital. The dish hasn't been washed before you got your food on. But I'm here to tell you which products have a dish that's been cleaned properly, put your food on, which is your music.
I like that. It's a good analogy. So here's the thing. Sometimes I'm reading the stuff, the graphs, right? I'm trying to figure out, like, all right, what does this mean, right?
Yeah.
How does it correlate? And of course, you have to kind of translate, I guess. You have to explain what this means. And I think in the translation, I feel like there's a room for you to inject maybe in the way you say something, or, there's always a subjective little spin on it, because of course you're a human being. You have a feeling towards this thing. So I feel like it's hard to not have any subjective, enter, unless you just don't say words. Here's the graphs.
Yeah, right. I did that when I first started. I said, here's the graph. Some people came back and said, so do you recommend this product? I said, no, here's the graph. They said, but are you going to recommend it or not recommend it? I'm like, what does that mean? They said, will you buy it? I said, okay, I will buy this, but not buy this one. And then pretty soon I wound up putting recommendations in there. So the recommendations were binary, yes or no. And that's at the end of the review. So that's subjective. And then one day I was looking at the pictures I was taking of my products, and I said, as a photographer, this is terrible. It's just a piece of material, just some equipment here and a wall behind it. What do I have that is some decoration I can point around this thing? I looked around, and my wife had bought these Pink Panthers for me years and years ago because I liked the movies. And so I took one of them, put it next to one, and I was like, I wonder if I can code these Pink Panthers to have a meaning, that there's a ranking order between them. And I started doing that. Pretty soon people figured out that they are ordered. And there's probably like 3 or 4 levels between them, or 5 levels, depending on how you look at it. So those are, of course, all subjective. Yet I get nothing but grief half the time. People come and say, why did you give this Panther to this one? I'm like, it's my opinion. They're like, no, your graphs say this. Why can't you prove that the Panther should be this level, not the other one? I'm like, look, it's my opinion. Ignore the Panther if it bothers you. It's a subjective opinion of Amir. So I do have some subjectivism in there as a practical matter.
Well, I mean, the headless Panthers just seems pretty harsh. It's not even half a head. It's the whole head is off. That's terrible.
So that the headless Panther, I bought this light box to take better pictures of this stuff, and it's got that white background with Velcro. It's a cheap, crappy one made, and the Velcro came off one time when I just had that Pink Panther on it and slipped off on the floor, and the head broke. So I grabbed the head and I was gonna glue it back on, and then I was testing something that was so terrible, it had me disgusted. I was like, why not just use it without the head? Said, this is so terrible that doesn't even deserve a full Panther. And I put that next to it, and it has become this thing now. I think I'm more known for a headless Panther than the other extreme, which is the golfing and the soccer ones, which are the opposite, which means they're just incredible products. And people take it personally, because especially if you send me something, I test it, and I got to give a headless Panther to, it's painful for me to give a product that's cool.
Now, if you ever post one that's just the head by itself, that's even worse.
I did that once. I forget what it was. Oh, it was a small product. All my Panthers were too big. I think I just put the head next to it. I've never done it since. So the head stays out of the view.
No, all right. So let's continue on this and just kind of talk about like weighting, because like a weighted rating system. Is that something? Because I know that you reviewed the Mica RB42 a while back, right? And of course, it's at the time is $129 a pair, and of course, I don't expect too much from $129 a pair, just a pair of speakers, right? And you measured them, and they weren't perfect, but I thought that they were, pretty reasonable for what you're getting. And I think there has to be some sort of thing where you have to take it, not you specifically, but people have to take into account like $129 a pair is very inexpensive, right? So how do you look at those things like value, aesthetics, build quality? Do you just put out the data and say, hey, you decide what value is for you? Like, how does that work?
You're asking a question that has created tons of arguments also on the forum. And I can't tell you that I have a 100% ironclad answer, but I have what works for me. What works for me is that if you give me a $12,000 deck and it measures like garbage, I'm going to be very, 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 very harsh on that one, right? I'm going to take the price into account slightly, but still the measurements is what damns it. But if the measurements are terrible, and some people, by the way, buy a great amplifier module, put their own edition like a preamplifier in it, and then screw it up, then I'm really ruthless when they raise the price and they do that. In general, though, my mission is to get you good sound. Guaranteed that if you buy something that I recommend is good sound. That means I can't recommend something that's cheap and good enough, but it's not really, really good sound. I always hold out hope that if I keep testing, there'll be another $150 speaker that is so good that I don't have to caveat it and say, hey, it's only $150. JBL 130 that came out recently, I tested a few months ago. I think on sale, that's also like 130, 150. It sounds as good as my Revell speakers. I mean, it's just shocking. I'm like, this is only like
a pair or a single?
A pair. It goes on sale, I think. I think so. Don't hold me to it. But JBL 130 is the model number. I forget what it is. But if you test enough, a great thing comes by all of a sudden. I started testing these little phone dongles. They're all terrible. They're all little $9 or freebie ones in there. All of a sudden, I test the Apple one. I'm like, whoa. This thing has almost desktop class performance. I'm glad I didn't say, hey, this thing is free. So what are you complaining about? It's got horrible measurements and doesn't get very loud, but hey, it's free. Therefore should be great. It's like, no, you come to my site. I'm going to tell you what to buy that's good. And if I can't find a $50 item, hey, save up your money. Don't keep getting those Starbucks coffees. Save another $50 to get something great.
I guess that's the thing is I think there's just area there where value to one person who maybe they can only afford $129. That's it. Their option is $129 or no speakers, right? To them, they're like, well, this thing has a headless Panther. Well, forget it, right? Yeah. So it's kind of tough, you know. Not everybody's a baller like you, Amir.
Yeah, the judgment call is the toughest thing I do. It isn't the testing. It isn't the review. It's this, how does Amir grab his arms around this product on that last sentence? What do I put in? And when I take the picture, which Panther do I put on it? Today, I tested this headphone I was telling you about and literally had me stumped. And I still don't know. After I hang up with you, I'm going to still think about what Panther I'm going to give it because it can get tough, that equation. One note, though, a lot of people think we're cheapskates that are objectivists. You probably know that I have very expensive audio systems. So to me, high priced isn't a penalty. Give me great performance. I don't care what it costs. Give me top of the line, state of the art performance and charge $10,000 for your DAC. That's beautiful. No problem. I mean, some great products are very expensive, are at the top of my rankings on this thing. So price doesn't limit me. Now, over time, I may change. That speaker that you talked about, it was early days that I was testing in speakers, and I wasn't as calibrated as I am today. So today, I do have a soft spot for very budget speakers. I look at them, I'm like, okay, this is a budget speaker. It's going to get distorted if I turn it up. But let me see, does it have good sound that would be good in a bedroom or what have you?
Right.
Somebody asked about this.
This is something I've been thinking about since I started this whole review thing is, know, I have different preferences. I have different weight on stuff that matters to me, and it's going to be totally different from someone else. And even if I look at all the objective data, I might recommend something completely different to somebody else because of their situation. The recommendation is going to be totally different. And so I think part of it is having the objective data, but then for the person to know what's important to them and then looking at the data and how does that correlate so I can pick a good speaker for myself or good whatever for myself.
So the way that answer comes about is asking on the forum. A lot of people ask me, I want to buy speakers, $300. What is it? I said, don't ask me. I test the stuff. I forget about it the next day. I'm testing so much product. I'm not a good recommendation engine. But the membership amazingly memorizes all these things and quickly comes back with like, here's the 3 reviews of these 3 products. And by the way, there's a 4th one Amir hasn't tested. You may want to buy that, send it to him for testing. So the community helps answer those things. I'm actually terrible about that. And if you're good about that, then great. You have other skills than I do. I'm just not that kind of person where I can provide consulting to somebody on what to buy, because it is true. Sometimes people want a smaller speaker, bigger speaker, less money. They want it in this color and what have you. There are a lot of other decision-making criteria. Yeah.
So maybe the answer is look at the measurements. The headless Panther, maybe don't put so much weight on that, because I think that's like a lot of people look at that. That's it. What is that? And then, if it's headless, this guy's golfing, look at the actual things. And then maybe I think part of it is teaching people how to correlate that data so they can understand what that means.
I can't go there. You can choose to go there. But I give the extreme scores. That means the extreme prejudice is attached with those. And extreme prejudice says, don't buy headless Panther. By golly, Amir will hold you back if you buy one of the ones with the golfing Panthers. The ones in between is where you're saying comes in. What if I just give an okay one? Sometimes I have one that is a mailman. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. So for those, I couldn't give you a straight answer. You decide. The measurement's yours. You can read through them, and you can interpret them differently than I did. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if you're asking, would I say don't buy a headless panther? I will always tell you don't buy anything that's headless panther. Just don't. Because there are a bunch of other ones I didn't give a headless panther, and you have plenty of choices there. Go choose from those. Now, could I be wrong? Sure. The data's there, you can decide.
I'll argue with that Mica RB42, but of course, if I go too far and I say, "Hey, I really like them," then you're gonna have people saying, "Hey, you must be getting paid by them. You must be this. You must be that." You know how that goes, right? If you like something, all of a sudden you're getting paid by this company. Like, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware.
I'm accused of being in the pocket of every company that I give high scores to. They think I'm in cahoots with Chinese companies, that they pay me. I've got a commission. I mean, I just can't fathom how people think I've spent this kind of money on instrumentation and I would have my hand out to say, hey, give me $10 if I recommend your product. I can't lie because I have to show objective information. How do I fake the objective information? I mean, the objective information is what speaks. But yeah, those kind of appearance of bias is a killer thing for us in this formats, at least.
Translation, I'm rich. What are you talking about? I don't need $10. You guys crazy? You get out of here.
Saying you don't make money without being wise about what you do with your money. And no, money doesn't grow on you. I've retired and we had a plan of how long we're going to live and what money we need to live on. And here I am buying all these expensive stuff that I never anticipated needing to buy for our everyday life. And I'm wondering, gosh, am I being stupid? How much money do you put towards a hobby on this thing? So, but yes, I'm a frugal person. Myself, I want to optimize my purchase dollars. So it isn't like, just go buy expensive stuff on this thing. But my ethics are so important to me that I just can't break those rules. So second line in every review I do says where the product came from. The company sent it to me, member sent it to me, I bought it. It's so important for me to just say up front, here's the deal, so before I go through the rest of the review.
A quick question here from John Lim. Thank you for the super chat. He says, please ask Amir, does he think Macintosh amps are worth the price or are they overpriced? Thanks.
You asked the one tough question I can't answer yet again. I've never had one to measure. I've had a bunch of people come this close to saying, I've got my Mac stuff. Do you want to test it? I'm like, yeah. And then there's no answer. And I've had no follow-ups. The guy came very close to sending me one a few weeks ago, and he backed out too. So as far as measurements, I don't know. I know that they look beautiful. Those view meters are killers, and they have the industrial design. They don't publish any measurements. So my antenna is up saying, at best, they're going to be average or better than average. I don't think they're going to be state-of-the-art, or they would brag about them like Benchmark and others do and saying, hey, here's our distortion ratings, what have you. But it's a wild guess. I wish somebody would send me one to measure and we could answer.
How much this is kind of off topic, but how much do you think the aesthetics make a difference in your purchase decision? Like,
Huge.
How much do you care? Because for me, I care how speakers look.
Huge. For me, is extremely important that it looks beautiful and I have a pride of ownership in it. And when somebody comes, you're like, yeah, check it out. Yeah, I'm a hobbyist. Check out my speakers. Check out this and check out my amp. I mean, that stuff has value. It's not free to get that good feeling about the thing.
Right.
You go to a fancy restaurant, they serve you, nice tablecloth, pretty plate and decoration. So you should, if you have the money, you should pay for those things to get more enjoyment. Just don't equate that with, therefore, the sound is great. That part requires some kind of objective verification that it sounds great other than you just saying that. So ideally, we combine the two. So when I tell you to buy this speaker, I tested Revell F328BE, $8,000 each. It's not cheap, but it's got a nice finish, nice speakers. Every speaker review I do, I talk about aesthetics of it, how pretty it is to my eyes, the material. Headphones the same way. When I test headphones, I'll talk about how attractive, even just ordinary DACs and things. I'd say, hey, look, this design feels nice, looks good, or this looks ordinary, or it looks industrial, because there's value there for sure.
Now, a lot of the stuff that you do, the measurements, they have what they call like spin data, where you're taking the speaker, you're taking all kinds of measurements around it, right? up and down.
Yeah.
You talked about the column of that it does. Now,
Yeah.
at the end, you have all these different measurements, and then one that I find very interesting is the predicted in-room response, the PIR, right?
Yeah.
And I find that very fascinating. I feel like it's like almost like the bottom line. Like, tell me
Yeah. Yeah.
what's
It's a little
going to happen here.
magical. It's a little magical that we could do that. So when we, the instrumentation I use, or when a speaker company puts a speaker in an anechoic chamber, it basically gives you what radiates from the speaker independent of a room. We want to know what the speaker's like rather than what room it was in. So when you get that information, you can tell what sound comes out of the speaker. But then the question is, what would it sound like in my room? You say, well, that's an impossible thing, right? You got to buy the speaker, bring it in your room, and then you'll find out. At the absolute, that is the right answer, that we can't with 100% accuracy predict what the speaker sounds like in your room. But we do know from tons of research that above a few hundred hertz, the speaker is what dominates the sound that you hear in your room. Not 100%, but 80, 90, 95% of the sound you hear is from that speaker. That's why if you change speakers, you'll know immediately that they sound different, even though the room is there. In bass frequencies, the room starts to dominate. The reflections have large wavelengths that are close to multiples of dimensions of the room, and the frequency response massively changes. So how do we marry all this stuff? So Harman had a researcher, Alan Devontier, that went out there and said, hey, why don't we research what the typical rooms are like that people listen in? So he went surveyed a bunch of rooms and found that, hey, they're not that different from each other, that the first reflections are the loudest ones that come from the floor, the ceiling, right wall, left wall, behind the speaker, and back. Every other reflection is much less in amplitude. And that he computed statistically, what are they on the average? How much of the right wall reflection, how much the left wall, how much the rear wall? And he came up with this composite that said, look, if you give me these measurements with these angles, so the speaker for, sound behind it is 180 behind it, the other one's in front, the directions, like floor is roughly 45 degrees. If you give me those radiation, the frequency response in those angles, I can sum them together into what's called the early window frequency response. And if I take that and combine it with a direct sound, I get 2/3 of the ingredients I need to predict what the speaker would sound like in a real room. The last 1/3 is bass. Because you put the speaker in a room, it hits the wall and reinforces. And he used what is called sound power, which we also measure, and use that for low frequency. Added these three things together, and you get a curve that is kind of similar to what you get in a room. In low frequencies, it assumes that you have perfect low frequency reproduction, which you're not going to have. So the low frequency response is a lie. It gives you this bass response like this, but in your room, you're going to get something like this. But overall, ratio is correct, saying that the speaker is producing a tonality that's like this or like this or like that. So when I test professional monitors, for example, they're a lot more flat, because they want the guy doing the mix or mastering to hear all frequencies more or less equal. Whereas home stereos, we want to have some tilting down of the highs. And so there's some idealistic factors there. So I always draw a line and then I tell you, hey, look, this sounds like it'll be bright because I can see a blip, in high frequencies above this line that I'm drawing. Or there's a hole in 1 to 3 kilohertz. Or there's a peak above in bass. So it's one of those magic tricks that people don't want to believe, that you can take anechoic results that has no room in it and add the room to it, and you've never been to my room. What does that mean? But the prediction works pretty well. When I think something's bright in measurements, then go listen to it, it sounds bright.
I actually do in-room measurements, and we've reviewed some of the same speakers. And, I'm just doing some basic stuff. And sometimes I'll go and I'll take your predicted in-room measurement and I'll overlay mine with the proper scaling. And the amount that it tracks it is amazing.
It's amazing.
I'm amazed. Of course, over a certain frequency, over that Schroeder frequency, that transition frequency, the amount that it tracks, like, we're listening to the same thing. I'm happy to know, like, we're hearing the same thing, right? And so that makes me very happy. Now, the question is, would it be wrong to assume, so you're saying that they checked out a bunch of different rooms and how speakers interacted in those rooms. Would it be incorrect to say that perhaps speakers generally above that transition frequency are going to kind of sound the same in different rooms above that so not the bass. So we have to I want to make sure that we're straight on that. The bass is going to be totally room dependent, right? Although that's going to really take over. And so that's what DSP is really great for, right? Correcting those. But would that be incorrect to say that, to make that assumption?
That the speaker, if they have identical response above transition, you're saying that they'll sound the same? Is that what you're asking?
Well, above a certain frequency, that if I have a speaker in my room and you have a speaker in your room, that we're going to get a pretty similar response above a certain frequency.
You're pushing me beyond the 90%, saying give me a 100% answer, and I can't. For example,
95. I thought you said 95 on your last interview.
No, so floor reflections, for example, can change the tonality about 500 hertz. So if you have a rug versus not having a rug, you may change tonality some in there. And indeed, when I show you the early windows, I show you the response from floor. And if that's screwing up the response more, I tell you, put a rug in there. Or if the ceiling is screwing things up, I tell you, I'm like, hey, either pick a high ceiling or put absorber or somehow. So I'd say within 80 to 90%, the higher frequencies are predicting tonality, and that if we both of us start looking at the same graph, we can make same predictions. But know that there's still a lot to the room acoustics, even above that frequency where we're hearing the sum of the reflections and the direct sound. It's a complex thing. So within 80 to 90%, yes, because I take a speaker with anechoic measurements and put it in my room, and boom, the predicted in-room response is mostly correct except for bass. So it works, but don't go 100% on it. Go most of the way there.
Okay, not 100. All right.
No,
I guess that's all I have, and so I'm like, at least if I'm getting an idea and I'm communicating that, hopefully I'm giving good information to people, just generally speaking. So this very technical stuff that we've been kind of talking about, and I said we're going to keep it fun. On your website, it says that you're the CFO, you're the Chief Fun Officer, right? That's what it says there. So, aside from spending your entire day doing measurements, right? Yeah. What other stuff are you into? Like any particular like hobbies, car stuff, sports? Like what's Amir about?
Sure. So gardening just started today, starting seedlings to go plant in the garden. So in a few weeks, I'll be so busy with gardening in addition to doing audio video. It actually competes with this hobby. So right now I can review a lot of stuff. But once gardening gets, fully on, that takes a lot of time. Photography is my other hobby, serious hobby, wildlife photography, landscape, people, abstract, and so forth. Then I enjoy watching YouTube and people like you and learning stuff on this thing. Travel, we love to travel during summer. We bought an RV and we go, sightseeing and on that thing. And that's probably electronics, of course. Forever has been a hobby, although I don't have time to build anything anymore. But ultimately, what I do is also my hobby. This stuff is the hobby, right? Doing reviews is a hobby, and writing about it and discussing it is also a hobby.
I got you. So you're a normal guy after all.
Yeah, it's amazing. I used to meet people at shows and they would say, "Holy cow, you're normal." When I read your writing on the site, you sound like you're this guy fighting. I'm like, yeah, the context of the forum is always these arguments, especially the domains that I go into. There's always somebody arguing back with me of, what do you mean the science is this? What do you mean the measurement is that? So 90% of the context becomes, this guy's a fighter and he's suddenly going to want to punch me in the face. But when they meet me, they're like, well, what is that good? How come you're normal? I'm like, what? Because we're different. It's like when you get behind a car, you become the, different person than when you,
Oh, yeah. If somebody cuts you off, you're like, what's up?
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah.
Let's go. Because you're behind the car. So it's kind of funny, even with us, like we kind of got started a little bit rough, and then you're like, oh, you kind of grew on me a little bit. And I one of the first things I said is like, I don't like forums. I feel like there's so much room for miscommunication in the way something is said, or versus on video. Like most of these people who are disagreeing, we're all talking about audio. At the end of the day, we're probably like, hey, get us all in a room. We'll probably have a good time together. So
the dynamics
about YouTube
tough.
Though. Yeah, about YouTube. So you just started your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was your reason for starting that, and what have you found is the difference between YouTube and the forum?
Sure. So quite a few years I wanted to do YouTube, but I just didn't have the video set up. And so I decided a couple of years ago to do audio only, voiceover, and I should do a few videos, and that was it. And then I realized, look, I just don't have the time to explain things in detail. If I do a 30-minute video and then I try to write that down, that'll be like 50 pages. And I thought, I should do videos because people keep asking me to explain these topics. And I just don't have the time. I'm constantly doing reviews. I'm managing the forum. I don't have the time to talk about, what does, speaker measurements mean? What are they like? And writing the articles that are that long is just very, very painful. I'm the kind of guy who wants to quickly get in, get out, and try to compose 5,000 words that are, proper grammar and spelling. It's just so tough for me. And I just, I always read it as if I intended rather than what's written. So people read my reviews, always know it's full of misspellings and what have you because of that. And so I did one video, and I got to say, I didn't know what to expect. I thought people wouldn't like it. They would say it's too long, too boring, or there'd be a bunch of people who just would hate it. And the feedback was positive. So I was like, okay, let me do one more. And I was like, hey, this is a great medium where your personality that we were talking about comes across, and you can explain things in a way that's, people relate to and they can watch. I'll tell you, 99% of my own learning comes from watching videos. If I want to know how to cook something, I look for a video of how to cook it. I don't go find a text version of it. If I want to see reviews of products, I always sort by video in Google search and watch the videos. And because I just, I'm seeing and feeling what the person's picking up. This is what the product looks like, and their impression of it, intonation, their voice and everything. So I've become a believer in it. The logistics are hard because I don't want to sit there and edit the videos. For me, it's all one take. So I got to be ready. I got to have my material ready, and I'm too lazy to always do that. So I pick topics where I could do that quickly. So I wish I could produce more, but I do enjoy it. The audience is different. I'm hitting a different cross-section. Very pleasant audience, very kind. I just, because I don't get that reception even on my own forum. It's like even the regulars are hostile. Why is this thing 1 dB down in here? What did you do here? What do you mean this is right? I love them for being there. Yeah, they keep me honest, if you will, but still, it is a tough thing. So I find the general level of kindness, at least the comments that I get, is quite high and rewarding from that point of view.
I personally like YouTube Amir more than forum Amir.
Yeah.
I feel like you just seem like more of a relatable person. Yeah. And when I hear you kind of like laughing or giggling about something, I'm like, oh yeah, he's having fun. He's having fun with it.
Yep. It's very hard in in text. So I'm with you 100%. Now, some things, you obviously can't keep producing videos every minute, so text is still posting measurements very quickly and everything, the forum is still the right thing. And also given, YouTube is great for quick commentary. It's not good for in-depth discussion. Members, people can't post pictures, images, and it's just hard to have an in-depth discussion in YouTube. So forum is good for that point of view where people dig really deep, like I could say X and they come back and say, well, how about Y, and that kind of thing. And I can present more information that way. I'm like, here's a bit of research. So they complement each other well. But I'm with you. I really enjoy videos in the YouTube format. I think it works quite well.
So, with these reviews, I've heard on I got distracted by this forum. Amir looks nicer. Man, I got thrown off with these reviews, right? I heard that your goal is you want people to have access to better products and to more data to make better decisions, things like that. But, maybe a skeptical me would say, well, what's in it for me? Like, what's in it for you if somebody else can get a nice system? Like, you have your nice system, I have my nice system. Why do you care if somebody else is able to get a nice system?
It goes back to when I was a child. I have this thing about sense of fairness. Like everything in life should be fair. To me, something is not fair if a manufacturer charges you $1,000 and you could go buy a $100 product that works better than it. It just rubs me wrong. So forever when I want to buy something, I always go research it. And whether it's a car, whatever, I have to find reviews. If I can't find reviews, I die. I'm paralyzed if I can't research a product and can't find out if it's good or bad. So, and I've enjoyed so much of that information that's out there that helps me in my purchase. I want to buy a torque wrench. There are 14 videos on torque wrenches and 12 other blogs about it. But if you want to go buy XYZ speaker, there's a glossy brochure and a bunch of people saying sounds good, it does. And it's like, no, somebody's got to provide this information. How come nobody is? Oh, okay, instrumentation is expensive and time to run them. The business model doesn't exist to go buy a $100,000 speaker measurement system and somebody spending day in, day out that understands all of that and produce videos that if you were going to monetize, you would make, $50 a day. So since the model doesn't exist and I could do it and I enjoy doing it, and I do it. And that's really a thing. There's a part of this is what I call a reality show. The first time I measure a speaker, it takes 4 hours. I bring the data in and it computes for a half hour. Then all of a sudden these graphs pop up and you have your impression of what that speaker is, good, bad, or indifferent. And all of a sudden this graph comes out and you're like, wow, I didn't expect this. And you sit there just like a reality show. You don't know how it's going to end. And all of a sudden the ending happens and no script or nothing. It has high satisfaction. I mean, it really does. It's like watching sports, except that you're making your own sports, if you will. And so that aspect is very good. Sometimes it gets old. I've tested like 400 DACs, and the 401 is like, okay, it's going to be 401. But it's still, there's enough variation as I got into headphone testing and speaker testing, other things where it's not one number, one value. It provides
400 DACs. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
400?
Yeah. I've got a spreadsheet in there. It's DAX in everything, not just DAX standalone. Standalone, probably 300, actually. 300, 350 are standalone products that are DAX.
So you're saying if I made a DAC, a DAC and I send it to you for free, that wouldn't convince you just because I hooked you up? On the top of the 400 other ones, that wouldn't convince you to just like give me a great review all of a sudden?
Coupon for a great sushi restaurant supplied with that kind of bribe might help you in that regard. I should say that I've been burnt by individuals getting into the hobby and sending me stuff. I used to say yes and test those things, but as of late, I've gotten so many broken things that literally didn't perform well, and I didn't have the heart to then publish the stuff, and I went back and said, look, the thing doesn't work. But then I tied up all the time in measuring it anyway. That I'm a little bit hesitant about what you say. But there are a lot of one-man shops building amplifiers and things, DACs and others that I do measure. And so it's not a big group. But if it's just a hobby project, no, I probably wouldn't measure it on that thing.
I was just joking just because like people say, hey, they sent you those speakers for free. I'm like, do you understand that I'm surrounded by speakers? Like, I don't want any more speakers. I want these speakers to go away.
Yeah. Speakers killed me. Oh, man. I bought 2 tall 7-foot racks that are 4 foot wide, and I filled them with speakers, and they've overflowed now everywhere. I just can't manage them. And I keep buying them myself. Those are the ones I'm stuck with usually. And speakers are terrible. Gosh, they're so big. AVRs are terrible, too. They're giant, big boxes.
Oh, the big amps. And I have a 1-bedroom apartment here in Los Angeles, so it's pretty rough. They're like, hey, we got some new subs out. I'm like, no,
that's terrible. No, I've filled every attic space. Our living room is full of boxes. I mean, it's just terrible. I have probably 100 to 150 DACs that I have sitting in boxes, brand new, doing absolutely nothing, sitting in the attic. I get them when manufacturers send them to me. I test them and I let it sit somewhere. So yeah, I hear you. The stuff accumulates, and if people think that's the bonus of a job, it really isn't. I mean, it's just my main system hasn't hardly changed. It's the system I bought, and that's what I continue using.
So rapid fire, because we're almost up on our hour and a half. So a few more questions. Have you ever been wrong?
Yes. And I've gone back and fixed them. I tested speaker and professional speaker and gave it a headless panther. And I gave it to the customer, and the customer actually, the client and the member returned it. The company actually went and found that speaker, brought it in and found out the woofer was actually damaged. And so they came and said that. I actually bought one myself then. And I tested it, and the second one was good, and I post that. It's happened a few times. It's harder for it to happen as I get a template going and a cadence going. And also I catch myself. Sometimes I do stuff. I'd say in general, you should assume 5% of what I post is wrong. I'm not a machine. I'm doing all this testing. I'm doing at a very high rate. I have nobody to QA my work. There's no editor here that comes and double checks this stuff. I don't have an intern doing the work, me testing it. I'm here to give you the 95% answer. The last 5%, I say, if you're a manufacturer, you disagree, give me your measurements, and then we'll compare. If you don't have measurements, you've never measured it, then I'm not going to listen to you saying it's wrong. You've got to come back with something. Go ahead and rent an analyzer. Send me another one to test, what have you. I'm here to have you make better products. So don't think I'm here to say, wow, look at this bad product I found. I want every manufacturer to build better product. So if you think my information is wrong, come on down. Now, people say, why don't you send your measurements to the manufacturer before you publish them? I'm like, are you kidding me? First of all, 2/3 of the manufacturers still don't give me time of day. I mean, I've contacted them. We did great reviews. I'm like, this is a great review. No answer. Who do you go contact us page on the website? It's like, they didn't reach out to me. I don't even know who to call in these companies to go say, here's the measurement. How long do you wait for them to verify it? If they don't like the data, they could sit on it forever. If they don't have their own measurements, say, whoa, this look bad. No, we don't give you the okay. So if a manufacturer sends me gear, by the way, I do that. If I find an issue, I go back to them and say, hey, look, did you know that this part of it is not good? What is your measurement? What is your data? And we exchange notes. But if a member sends me something, I'm going to test and publish them. I'm in the business of being a service to community. If a manufacturer hasn't lifted a finger to get a product tested, I don't see a reason to go to them. Does that mean sometimes my data is wrong? It does. I don't know how to fix that problem. It's just beyond me.
Yeah, sometimes you really can't win, because if you don't deal with them, people are going to complain, and then if you do, they're going to say, "Oh, well, you guys are colluding and you guys are doing something together." It's like, which one is it? Which one is it?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And I've decided 100% to be on the side of the membership and the consumer. So for me, when I have ties to break, that's how I break it. Which is, you've given me something to test. They say, well, this is a little company, one-man shop selling these things. I'm like, yep, they've got my sympathies, but I was given this device to test and it doesn't measure well, and I'm going to put the measurements out there. They're like, don't you worry about the guys in business being impacted. Personally, I do, but that's not the role I play. I have a responsibility. Somebody paid for shipping of this product, send it to me to be published for other people to know this data. I'm sorry, it has some consequences if you don't build good products and you don't measure it yourself.
That's a risk you take. You put it out there, right? It's not like it's a private product. It's it's out in the public.
Exactly. When I worked
How about the guy who buys it and it sucks?
Yeah, exactly. Who sheds a tear for the poor consumer who's been buying this stuff and it's a dud and they didn't know on this thing. But it's tough. I tell you, I feel bad for these companies that are in this business. I think the worst thing in the business is being hardware business in audio. Terrible business, very competitive, very tough to break through. So no, I have sympathies for them, but I didn't choose to be an audio manufacturer. They did. And it comes with the territory. And this is me. If the product lands on my desk and it doesn't measure well, people are going to know about it. I mean, I don't know how to deal with that differently.
When I first heard about you, I looked you up and I'm like, here he is with his award. He's VP at Microsoft and he worked at Sony. I'm like, man, this guy's super smart. It's easy to hate on guys like that, right? Look at this guy all successful over here. I don't know. Not me. Actually, I look up to people who have found success, but is there anything you're not good at? What are you not good at?
A lot of things. But let me tell you where that came from. I started without any of that, and people kept writing, who's this random dude who bought an audio analyzer? He probably doesn't even know how to turn it on, so all of his measurements are wrong. This went on for like a year. People would keep coming back saying anything that I measured poorly, they would say, who the hell's this guy? What does he know? He doesn't even know how to turn it. And I have people at other forums that have measurement equipment that would write the same thing. I just had a talk with a designer of audio precision, and therefore all my measurements are right. This guy, Amir guy, who's this bride? Someone would call me the bride, Japanese bride guy, because of my avatar. And I was like, who the hell is he? So one day I got tired of it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to stick out my resume on this thing. Stop saying, who the hell's this guy? And that worked, by the way. 90% of people said, "Oh, okay, we're not going to make that argument. Who the hell's this guy?" They still do sometimes, but at least cut out in me for the 15th time saying, "I'm an electrical engineer." What do you mean I don't know? I bought the first audio precision in 1990s, or in late 1980s, actually. It's been 30, 40 years. Don't say I don't know how to turn this thing on. And so it has helped from that point of view of not having to repeat things. But what was your question? I forgot there was a question. The people
I was just saying,
yeah.
there must be something you're not good at. For me, I'm not good at directions, you know? I'm terrible at directions. Like, give me the Google Maps and just tell me.
Yeah. So, as I've gotten older, my memory's gotten worse. That's why I said, don't ask me to tell you, what good products I've reviewed. I've forgotten about most of them already. Second one is that I'm not the most detail-oriented guy. I'm not going to go reread my review 10 times, make sure all the text and the grammar and everything is perfect. But I have made sure that my measurements don't suffer by creating templates for each test so that I don't go type in all the parameters. I pull up a test that's exactly for jitter. I connect 2 cables and I say go. Can I stick the 2 cables wrong? No. But if the device has a mode, or I tested an amp recently, has a switch underneath to change the gain. I didn't know the bloody thing had a switch underneath. So people came back and said, "What gain did you test?" I'm like, "What gain? There's nothing." And he had 14 buttons in the front. None of them were gain. They said there's switches underneath. I'm like, shoot. The switches underneath. They're like, "Yeah, the switches on." And I look up. They're like, "Why didn't you read the manual?" I'm like, "It's a headphone amplifier." I didn't think I needed directions on how to operate a headphone amplifier. They have all these switches out. So, yes, occasionally you catch sloppiness from me. And I go back, and it's interactive. If I still have the equipment, I go look it up, and I can fix things. I like magazines that do the review, and it's gone to press. My data is fluid. It's on a forum, and I'll go put a big note in there, say, "Hey, I tested it at this gain. I didn't know there was a gain switch." Expect some amount of sloppiness from Amir. Hopefully not where it matters. But it's me. I'm a 95% guy. Get you most of the information you need. Get it quickly. I can't sit there and write a book like Dr. Toole writes. I just could not. I wrote one book once and nearly killed me. It took me 3 years to finish the book because I just can't get the words out like he can so eloquently on this thing. So, yes, I do have flaws, and those are some of them.
So, aside from Floyd Toole, and Sean Olive, is there anybody else? It doesn't even have to be audio related. Who else do you look up to?
Gosh, a tough question. Depends on the domain, I guess. Nobody's asked me that question in a long time. Sounds like an interview question.
I know, right? I figured the guy who a lot of people look up to. I want to know who he looks up to.
I don't have, you said you read a lot of business books. I do not. I could tell you, Bill Gates I look up to and everything, but that would be too much of a cliche. I don't have many idols like that on this thing. I just respect a lot of, Einstein, for example. As to this day, no matter how many times I read about him, I can't figure out how the guy could have figured out what he figured out. The theory of relativity and E equals MC squared. It's like, how the hell did speed of light get into energy? It's like, it makes no sense whatsoever. So there are people that I just say, wow, that they have this level of intuition to jump. I'm very good. If you give me a concept, I can drive it so efficiently and optimize for the goal. I'm not necessarily a guy who just invents eBay for you, like Elon Musk or PayPal, that wake up and say, the thing. YouTube started. My team came to me when I was at Microsoft, said, "You know about this thing called YouTube?" I'm like, "I've heard of it." They showed it to me. I'm like, "This is the stupidest thing there is." They said, "Why?" I said, "Who's paying for this bandwidth? I said, video is expensive. This guy's uploading video by cats, and these morons are paying for the bandwidth." I'm like, there's no economics. There's no ads you could run that would pay for the bandwidth cost. And then Google buys them for $2 billion. And I'm like, that's too stupid. It's like, I didn't imagine Google needing this. And then after 10 years, they figured out how to make money off of it. But those guys had figured out an innovation that was way ahead of its time, that the bandwidth was going to keep getting cheaper. Even to this day, I upload a video and I see, my videos are long, so it's a gigabyte upload. And 5 minutes later, Google's encoded it. I just can't fathom the number of servers these guys have deployed to take a 1 gigabyte, encode it into multiple bit rates and put it in there, and they don't charge me for it. And It's like, I wouldn't have thought about that business model. I would have said, it doesn't work. I mean, how much money are we going to make from this guy? And I don't even have any ads or monetization on my channel. You would think they would say, hey, you don't have this monetization on. We're not going to do this because we don't make money off of you. So I'm not as much of a, jump the chasm kind of guy. But if you are on that curve and you want to turbocharge, you want to get to the final outcome very quickly and optimally, I'm your person on this thing.
Got you. Now we only have about 5 more minutes, so a few more questions that I wanted to get out. And if there are any other questions that you like that you see here, feel free to answer them. But what you have all these cool jobs. What was your worst job? Do you remember any like bad jobs that you had when you were younger?
Yeah, my worst job was the first time I arrived at Microsoft. We were doing streaming video on the internet when people only had dial-up modems. Stanford spin-up in California, sold the company to Microsoft. And the executives had to come with the company or the acquisition wouldn't go through. So I'd sign up coming up over here. And as soon as I arrived, the group that had acquired us decided that we were the enemy and that their code was better than all the assets that we had brought. And there should be a war to see who wins and who loses. And this battle exploded. And half the people got come up, quit and went back to California. I was stuck there, and because I had all these stock options that were not fully vested, and here I had brought my family here. They loved it here. They've gone to school here, and I hated every minute of that job for a year and a half, till I was handed that codec team. And all of a sudden, I was like, aha, this is my niche at Microsoft. It's a brilliant company for the amount of talent it had. At the time, I had 25,000 employees, and I said 20,000 of them were as smart as you. And so you don't just jump ahead of the game because you're smart there. You had to be different than them. And I had a ton of software engineering experience, but I was like, these guys know all about NT, kernel. I'm a new guy. They have an advantage. They have a political advantage and everything. So I didn't want to go in the traditional software jobs there. Indeed, I got a position to go in NT operating system group, and I just decided that wasn't it for me. And then I realized, they don't know audio and video. They're also not good with customers. They're not good with manufacturers. I'd worked for Sony. So for me, it was easy to go to Japan, meet the Japanese executives, and immediately get their trust because, I knew how to, behave and how to act very different than typical Microsoft person who would show up as a Westerner, and they would immediately resent this, these guys want to take over Japan and what have you. And I would go in there and say, no, I'm here to collaborate with you. And it took 2 or 3 years to convince them to work with me. I mean, there were so many sins we had committed as Microsoft, as an American company, that these guys were very much against us. But I found that job very, very rewarding on this thing. So, but yeah, I regretted every minute of the first year that I was up here in Seattle area. First year at Microsoft was the worst job.
No best codec, by the way, is Pied Piper. You ever watch Silicon Valley?
No, I only watched parts of that show. I didn't watch all that, but I was surprised how much of a proper lingo they were trying to get in there and things like codecs and stuff. I was surprised. I was like, wow, right. Yeah. So
last two questions that I have are, what's your pet peeve when it comes to other audio reviewers? Because I know I have some. I get more critical because I'm also reviewing some of the same speakers, and I'm like, what are you saying? What's your pet peeve when you see other reviewers?
There is here's my frustration. Some people have incredible video and audio video production skills, and they use that to be convincing rather than any knowledge of what I call truth in audio. So you see the guy with gorgeous lighting, gorgeous, slow pans of a gear and equipment and everything. Then he starts talking about this speaker has this micro detail, it's got this lamp, it's got a fast this and that. And I'm just like, none of that means anything, or the cables. Right. And, I'm like, what? This is just a fantasy you're selling to people. But because you're so good on camera, because your production qualities are so great, so many people are believing you. And I look at the comments, people say, right on, I'm going to go buy this. It's my dream product, X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, look, guys, you should be in infotainment business. You should make a contract with the manufacturer, pay you to produce these infomercials. and mark them as infomercial. You're also great at functionality. They're very good, many of them talking about the box. Here's the specs, here's the features, there's the woofers this size, got a this tone control, this DAC has it. I don't do any of that. I don't have the patience to sit there tell you what the woofer size and all that stuff, and how the device operates, what's its usability. There's a ton they can cover, but they spend most of their time trying to tell you what the fidelity is like. And they're just like completely devoid of that. And I always say, you got to pick a source that's reliable. How do you know what this guy's saying is correct? And people say, well, I like his taste. If I agree with most of his reviews, therefore he must tell the truth. I'm like, no. What is he bringing as far as backup? Just his 2 ears. You don't even know this person. What did he do 5 years ago? And he just talks about a speaker. You know, if you handed me half the products these people have, I wouldn't know what to say without objective measurements. I mean, measurements allow me to cheat. And I look at them like, whoa, the north points this way. Okay, at least I know the speaker doesn't go below 100 hertz. You know, I'm not going to wax poetic about how it doesn't need a sub. You know, I already know that it's got problems there. So anyway, that frustrates me, that how slick these people are, how good they are at their craft of video production, that is influencing people with respect to what they're saying.
I got you. You know what? I think you can make nice looking videos, and you can also be informed. Like, they don't have to be one or the other, right? You can do both.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you got to have a minimum standard of audio video quality. You and I talked before we went live that I was adamant to get something decent. You know, I remember grabbing a camcorder and a webcam, and so I was like, whoa. This stuff, just people going to take one look at it and say, this guy's not serious about the topic. So, well, they want to better research this. I watched a bunch of YouTubes and see what people were using. I'm like, okay, I'm going to use my DSLR camera. And, I don't want to dedicate to this use, and I hope it doesn't break. But, it's important to me that the audio video be at least the acceptable level, rather than some fuzzy, grainy thing with bad sound. Because I'm competing with people who are just so good at this thing.
The bad audio kills me. They're reviewing audio, and then the bad audio is like one of my pet peeves. That would be mine. My wife says not enough YouTubers marking their videos as sponsored when they're getting paid. Yes, agreed.
Yeah, for sure.
So last thing that I would want to ask you is, what is your vision for the future of hi-fi? Like, what would you like to see happen in 5 years? Of course, it's hard to predict, but what would you like to see happen 5-10 years from now?
It's already started, and I can't take credit for seeing it happen, but I'm starting to see that the world of audio is starting to take this objectivity and science seriously. Already companies who don't have a brand 100% there, the companies in China, and they're like, measurements speak, and I can get a great Panther from Amir, and I sell a lot more products. I'm buying an audio precision analyzer. I'm buying another one, 30,000, no problem. I'm buying it. Then you have still the slackers in the US who don't even have an analyzer, despite being a big company. So they started it, and then I'm starting to see more and more companies. All of a sudden, I do a review that doesn't read well. Instantly, the company contacts me. Very pleasant, very cooperative, despite me having just given them a poor review. They're like, Amir, what can we do on this thing? Can I send you another one? Here's our measurement. Can we do, can we please have a discussion? I'm like, great. So I'm starting to notice about a 5%, 10% direction change, course correction, where people are saying, whoa, this stuff matters now. It used to not matter to marketing of any audio product. You just needed to have pretty pictures in a brochure, and we would sell. But they're like, wow, this audio science review has become enough of a source of this thing that we better pay attention. And each company is in a different stage. There's still some that are asleep at the helm. But more and more companies are saying, hey, we could design great products too. We just didn't know that anybody cared. We can, like Shet is a company, we talked about, American company, used to build products that were okay, but not that great performance. And then one day they just said, forget, we're buying an analyzer, we can build the same stuff. And they came out with state-of-the-art products, same prices, same budget prices. And I'm seeing more and more, So I can't say that it's me that's done this. It's me and the 2.2 million visitors a month that come to Audio Science Review. All of us collectively, we're way more popular now than Stereophile and many, many audio video. I mean, there's only Headfly, I think, that's slightly ahead of us, but all other, sites we've surpassed, because people want information, want reliable information, want something that's tangible, that's true, and it's starting to rub off. So that's my hope, that in 4 or 5 years' time, when I'm too old to want to do this, I'm too cranky to put up with the people arguing with me, that when I stop, that the world is starting to churn on its own, that companies doing their own measurements, they're publishing them, and there's enough incentive that, people do engineering correctly again. I mean, engineering used to matter in audio. It seems to have stopped mattering, and hopefully that will change. So that's my dream 5 or 10 years from now. Until then, I need to measure a whole lot more gear. That's my goal.
Well, I appreciate it. I know I learn a lot from you and the things that you're doing. So I think I do see it also moving in the direction that you're talking about, where there is objective data. So I really appreciate the time that you take to do all of that and to help inform. I want to see some more like informational videos on YouTube. I love those. So again, I've taken up too much of your time. Thank you for being on here. We need to talk again, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe another time.
Basic. But I want to give you credit. You said you had a little bit of a rough spot when you first came on the forum, and I gave you a rough time because I thought you were just the infomercial YouTuber, hadn't watched hardly any of your videos. And then I saw an incredible thing where I saw a transformation in you, where you started to see the value in objectivity and science, and started to change, I think, in how you were interacting on the forum and everything. And I said, look, this it's rare. It doesn't happen that often where a person just looks at this and says, hey, I'm going to change and I'm going to adapt. I'm going to do things more objectively. And I said, well, this is the kind of person I need to know. And so I want to compliment you. It's not easy to do. It's to say I've been going this way and I'm going to start, shifting this way. And it was helpful that you were already doing some measurements and everything. So you had a foot in the camp already. But I've been seeing this, great attitude that you demonstrate towards objectivity, that it's just a, great thing to see in a sea of just visuals on YouTube.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. It's not hard. Just say, hey, I was wrong. That's it. I was wrong. I don't want to be wrong anymore. Let me try to be more correct. That's it. The end.
It's hard for many people. So it's great credit to you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Amir. Don't go. I want to talk to you a little bit after the show. But if you have any other questions, maybe we can go back and go through the live chat and maybe answer some of these, because I took up most of the time. So anyway, thanks again, Amir.
I appreciate it.
Take care,
Thanks
everybody.
for having me.
Okay,
bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.